The cold breath of December enveloped the city streets with crisp air. Snowflakes fell softly, as if they didn't want to disturb the silence of the early morning. Ryan Dakota, weary after another night shift, slowly drove his old pickup down the empty main street. The radio quietly played classic jazz, and the steam from his breath lazily drifted through the cold cabin. He loved this time of day when the city froze before awakening, as if gathering strength for a new day. Ryan's gaze slid along the roadside, and suddenly his heart skipped a beat. A little farther ahead, near the sidewalk, something bright stood out against the white snow-covered canvas. He hit the brakes, feeling a strange premonition. The pickup stopped and Ryan stepped out, shoving his hands into his jacket pockets against the biting cold. As he approached, he noticed an orange piece of fabric barely visible under a layer of snow. His steps quickened, his heart pounding. Bending down to examine the find, he froze. Beneath the fabric lay a fragile child's body. "Oh, God," he whispered, quickly brushing the snow off the girl. A tiny, delicate figure, barely clad in a coat too thin for the weather, lay motionless. Her cheeks were chapped and reddened from the cold, her lips cracked, and her eyelashes were frosted with ice. Ryan leaned closer, straining to hear even the faintest sound of her breathing. She was alive but shivering so violently it frightened him. "Hey, sweetheart, can you hear me?" he asked softly, trying to make his voice as gentle and encouraging as possible. The girl weakly opened her eyes, gray like the winter sky, filled with confusion and exhaustion. Her lips trembled as if she were trying to say something. "Warm. I'm so warm," she mumbled, unable to comprehend where she was. Ryan looked at her in alarm. He understood. She was too cold to grasp reality. Her mind was tricking her into thinking she was warm. "No, no, sweetheart. You're freezing. You need to get warm." He quickly took off his coat, wrapping her tiny body in it and pulling her close to transfer his warmth. "Can you stand? What's your name?" "Sophia," she whispered before her eyes fluttered shut again. "All right, Sophia, hang on. I'll take you somewhere safe. Everything will be okay," he murmured, lifting her into his arms. She was as light as a feather, which only heightened his worry. He placed her on the passenger seat of the pickup, cranked the heater to full blast, and covered her with a blanket he found behind the seat. Sophia didn't speak anymore. She closed her eyes, barely stirring, but Ryan could hear her faint, uneven breaths. The roads were nearly empty as he cautiously made his way through the town, one hand on the wheel, the other checking the fragile pulse at her thin wrist. He couldn't understand how a child ended up alone in such weather. His thoughts were a jumbled mess. Who was she? Where were her parents? Why wasn't anyone looking for her? 20 minutes later, Ryan stopped in front of his house. Inside, the familiar smell, a mix of medications and a faint hint of lavender, greeted him. It was a home where time seemed to have stopped, arranged entirely for the comfort of his bedridden mother, Agnes, who hadn't left her bed for over a year. "Who's there?" a faint voice called from the bedroom. "It's me, Mom," Ryan said, closing the door and carefully carrying Sophia into the living room. "I brought a guest. She's a child. She needs help." "A child? We don't have room for strangers." His mother's voice turned sharp, like steel. "Not now, Mom," Ryan snapped. He gently laid Sophia on the couch, covered her with a blanket, and went to the kitchen to heat some milk. His mother's constant grumbling echoed from the bedroom, but he barely heard her. His entire world now revolved around the little girl lying on his couch, fragile as a porcelain doll. Ryan couldn't explain why he felt such a profound sense of responsibility for her, but he knew he wouldn't let her return to the cold. When the milk was ready, he returned to Sophia and helped her take a few sips. The warmth brought a bit of life back into her, and she looked at him with clearer eyes. "You'll stay here until we figure out how to help you find your mom, okay?" he said with a certainty meant to comfort her. Sophia didn't answer, but her gaze spoke louder than words. She trusted him. Ryan knew this day would change everything. The warmth of the home's hearth, which once comforted Ryan, now felt cold. The house he returned to with little Sophia had long since ceased to be a place of comfort. It had become a cage of memories and medicine, filled with the heavy presence of his mother, Agnes. Sophia slept curled up on the couch under a blanket, Her face still bore traces of frozen sweat, and she looked far too fragile. Ryan carefully adjusted the blanket, trying not to wake her. But the silence was broken by a sharp voice from the bedroom. "Ryan, what's going on? Are you going to answer me?" Agnes's voice was cold, like the December air outside. Ryan closed his eyes and took a deep breath. That tone was familiar, demanding and always tinged with reproach. "I found a child, Mom. She was alone on the street. I couldn't leave her out there freezing," he said, striving to keep his voice calm. "You couldn't leave her there?" Agnes repeated, tasting the words. "What about taking care of your own family? Or have you forgotten who truly needs help here?" Ryan felt a surge of irritation rising within him. He stepped into the hallway and walked toward his mother's bedroom, but stopped just inside the doorway. Agnes lay on the bed, her thin fingers playing with the quilt. Her gaze was sharp despite her apparent exhaustion. "It's just temporary, Mom. I just want to help her get back on her feet," he said gently, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Temporary?" She raised an eyebrow. "And then what? Are you planning to adopt her? We're already barely making ends meet with my treatment, and now you're adding another problem." Ryan felt the tension in his chest tighten. "She's not a problem, Mom. She's a child who needs help," he said, though his voice was too quiet to persuade her. Agnes studied him for a long time, her eyes filled with a mix of disappointment and reproach. "You've always been like this, Ryan, taking responsibility for things that aren't yours. Do you think playing savior makes you better in other people's eyes?" Her words struck a nerve. Ryan stood up, feeling the conversation slipping into familiar territory, endless accusations that seemed designed to highlight his inadequacies. "I'm just trying to help," he said firmly. "If you can't understand that, then maybe we're living in different worlds." He returned to the living room, feeling the air in the house grow heavier. Sophia stirred slightly, her small fingers clutching the edge of the blanket. "You won't send me back home, will you?" she suddenly asked, her eyes opening. Her voice was timid, but there was fear in it. Ryan crouched beside the couch. He looked into her eyes, trying to infuse his gaze with reassurance. "I won't let anyone hurt you," he said. "You'll stay here until we figure out how to help you and your mom." Sophia looked at him for a few moments before nodding quietly. Her trust was as fragile as ice on a lake, and Ryan knew one misstep could shatter it. Later that evening, he sat in the kitchen with his head in his hands. A cup of black coffee sat in front of him, long since gone cold. His mother's sharp words replayed in his mind, her accusations of him playing hero. Those words dragged him back to childhood memories. He remembered how he'd always tried to please her as a child. When he brought home certificates or won prizes, her reaction was always the same. Not good enough. When he tried to help with chores, she only noticed his mistakes. At some point, Ryan realized that no matter how hard he tried, it would never be enough for her. These thoughts tormented him until he heard soft footsteps. Sophia stood in the kitchen doorway, hugging herself. "I can't sleep," she said quietly, her voice trembling. Ryan stood and took her hand. "That's okay. Sometimes, when your heart feels heavy, sleep doesn't come right away," he said, leading her back to the couch. He tucked her in again and sat beside her, feeling he couldn't leave her alone. "Are you always this kind?" she suddenly asked. Her voice was soft, but there was a hint of wonder in it. "I just want you to be safe," he replied, unsure how else to explain his actions. Sophia looked at him with her gray eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you," she whispered before her eyes slowly closed. Ryan watched her until her breathing became steady. He realized that this child had brought not only chaos into his home, but something more. She had become a mirror, reflecting his own fears, his need to be needed, his desire to make the world better, even if no one ever thanked him for it. He knew one thing. From this moment on, he could no longer live as he had before. Morning in Ryan's house began with the muted light of the winter sun filtering through the curtains in the living room. Sophia was still asleep, curled up on the couch. Her face looked peaceful, but Ryan knew that beneath her fragile exterior lay something deeper. Something that troubled her even in her dreams. He quietly walked into the kitchen, careful not to wake the girl. His hands instinctively reached for the coffee maker, but his mind wandered far away. The previous day's conversations with his mother and the look in Sophia's eyes, filled with both fear and gratitude, still occupied his thoughts. The sound of footsteps broke his reverie. Standing in the kitchen doorway was Agnes, leaning on her cane. Her face was stern, her eyes sharp as ever. "You seem to think you're some kind of saint," she said without greeting, studying him with her piercing gaze. "Keeping a child you barely know in our house? That's just foolish." Ryan took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. He knew that talking to his mother always turned into an emotional ordeal. "Mom, she's a child in trouble. I couldn't just leave her," he said, attempting to sound convincing. "And what now? Are you planning to be her savior?" "You're too kind, Ryan, and that's always worked against you," Agnes replied, sitting down at the table. "You can't save the whole world." "I'm not trying to save the whole world. I'm just trying to help one child," he said, masking his irritation. "You think this will make you better? That it'll change what I've always said about you?" Agnes squinted, her voice lowering, but still tinged with sharpness. "You've always been too weak. You can't just say no." Those words hit hard. Ryan felt anger boiling inside him. How many times had he heard this from her? How many times had she questioned his decisions and his very identity? "Maybe you're right, Mom. But you know what I've realized? I won't let your words define who I am anymore. If that makes me weak, so be it," he said, staring her straight in the eyes. For a moment, Agnes was silent. Her face grew tense, as if she was searching for new arguments. But instead, she stood up from the chair and, walking heavily, returned to her room. After breakfast, Ryan decided to talk to Sophia. He sat across from her, watching as she carefully ate her oatmeal. Her movements were quick but deliberate, as if she was trying to stay quiet and avoid disturbing the fragile peace of the house. "Sophia," he began gently, trying not to scare her. "I wanted to talk to you about your family. Can you tell me where your mom is?" The girl froze and looked at him. Her eyes filled with anxiety, and she gripped her spoon so tightly her knuckles turned white. "My mom, she's at home," Sophia said, her voice trembling. "But my dad, he's mean." Those words caught Ryan off guard. He felt his heart stop for a moment. "What do you mean?" he asked carefully, not wanting to push too hard. Sophia hesitated for a moment, then lowered her gaze, as if deciding whether to continue. Finally, she spoke softly. "He's always yelling at us. Sometimes he hits my mom. Sometimes he hits me. He says he wanted a boy, not a girl." These words made Ryan freeze. He saw how Sophia tried to be strong, but her fragile voice betrayed her fear and pain. "Sophia, listen to me," he said, placing his hand over her small one. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. You're safe here, okay? I promise." The girl nodded, but her eyes remained wary. She wanted to believe him, but years of fear couldn't disappear in just one day. Later that day, Ryan called the number written on the tag of Sophia's coat. After a few rings, a woman answered, her voice trembling and confused. "Hello," she said hesitantly. "Hello, my name is Ryan Dakota. I found your daughter, Sophia. She's safe at my home," he began. There was silence on the other end of the line, followed by a sob. "Is she okay? Oh God, I've been so worried," the woman said quickly, her voice filled with relief and despair at the same time. "She's okay, but I get the feeling she's afraid to come back home. Could we meet in person?" Ryan suggested. There was a pause on the other end. Then the woman spoke. I can't. Her father will find out. He'll never forgive me if I leave." Ryan felt anger rise within him. He wanted to say something but held back. Her fear was real, and he knew he had to act carefully. "Listen," he said calmly. "Sophia is safe here. I won't let anyone hurt her, but you need to decide what to do next. If you want, I'll help you." The woman didn't respond. Instead, he heard a soft sob before the line disconnected. Ryan stared at the phone for a long time. His thoughts raced between anger and compassion. He didn't know what motivated this woman: fear, love for her daughter, or something else. But he knew one thing. He wouldn't let Sophia return to a place where she could be hurt again. His gaze shifted to the girl, who was quietly playing with a doll in the living room. She seemed small and defenseless, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Ryan knew his decision would have consequences, but that no longer mattered. She was now part of his life, and he was ready to do whatever it took to protect her. Emma, her hands trembling, looked at Ryan with a mix of hope and fear. "You don't understand. Robert, he's not just controlling. He's dangerous. If he finds out that I've taken Sophia, he won't stop until he finds us," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. Ryan leaned forward, his expression firm. "Listen to me, Emma. You're not alone anymore. I won't let anything happen to you or Sophia. I have a friend, James. He's a lawyer. He can help us file for divorce and restraining orders. But first, we need to make sure you're both safe." Emma hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't have anywhere to go, Ryan. No money, no one to turn to. For years, I've been trapped in this nightmare because I thought it was the only way to keep Sophia safe." "You have me," Ryan said firmly. "I'll figure this out. You and Sophia will stay with me for now. We'll take it one step at a time." For the first time in years, Emma allowed herself to believe in hope. She nodded slowly, her voice barely audible. "Thank you, Ryan." The next day, Ryan contacted James and explained the situation. James immediately got to work, helping Ryan prepare the necessary legal documents and filing a report with the local police about the threats posed by Robert. "This isn't going to be easy," James warned during one of their meetings. "Men like Robert don't give up control easily, but if we build a solid case, we can ensure both Emma and Sophia are protected." Ryan nodded, determination burning in his eyes. "Just tell me what we need to do." In the following weeks, Emma and Sophia moved into a temporary safe house that James had arranged in a nearby town. Ryan visited them every day, bringing groceries, toys for Sophia, and updates on their case. Slowly, he began to see changes in both of them. Emma's posture straightened, her voice grew stronger, and she began to laugh again, something he hadn't seen in years. As for Sophia, the little girl who once flinched at every sound, was now smiling more often and talking excitedly about her new life. One evening, as Ryan sat on the porch with Emma, watching Sophia play in the yard, Emma turned to him. "You've done so much for us," she said softly. "I don't know how to thank you." Ryan looked at her, his expression gentle. "You don't need to thank me, Emma. I'm just doing what's right." Emma hesitated, then said, "I don't think I've ever told you how much I regret leaving you. It wasn't my choice, but not a day went by when I didn't think about you." Ryan reached out and took her hand. "We can't change the past, but we can make sure Sophia has a future where she's loved and safe." Emma smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "You've already given her more than I ever could have hoped for." As the legal battle unfolded, Robert's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He sent threatening messages and even attempted to locate Emma and Sophia. But thanks to James's efforts, restraining orders were put in place. The court hearings were tense and emotional, but Emma, with Ryan by her side, faced them with newfound courage. Finally, after months of struggle, the divorce was finalized, and full custody of Sophia was awarded to Emma. Robert was barred from contacting them, and the court mandated therapy sessions for him as part of the proceedings. When the court case was finally over, a sense of relief swept over Ryan, Emma, and Sophia. They knew the battle had been hard fought, but now they could begin to move forward as a family. Ryan decided to take Emma and Sophia back to his home, a small but cozy house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was filled with warmth and love, something both Emma and Sophia had been missing for so long. One sunny afternoon, while Ryan was fixing the squeaky front door, Sophia ran up to him, holding a crayon drawing in her hands. "Look, I drew this for you," she exclaimed, her gray eyes sparkling with excitement. Ryan knelt down to take the drawing. It was a picture of three figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Above them, Sophia had written in uneven, colorful letters, "My family." His heart swelled as he looked at the image. "This is beautiful, Sophia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm going to hang it right here on the fridge." Sophia beamed, and Emma, who had been watching from the doorway, smiled softly. Seeing her daughter happy and safe for the first time in years made her realize just how far they had come. That evening after dinner, they all sat together by the fireplace. Ryan had made hot chocolate for everyone, and the room was filled with the comforting sound of crackling logs. Sophia cuddled up with her favorite doll, her eyes growing heavy with sleep. "Ryan," Emma began, her voice quiet, I don't think I'll ever be able to repay you for everything you've done for us." Ryan reached out and took her hand. "You don't have to repay me, Emma. All I ever wanted was to see you and Sophia safe and happy. That's more than enough for me." Emma looked into his eyes, her heart full of gratitude. "You gave us hope when we had none. You showed us that love and kindness can conquer even the darkest times." Sophia stirred, her small voice breaking the quiet. "Are we a real family now?" she asked sleepily, her head resting on Ryan's shoulder. Ryan smiled and gently kissed the top of her head. "Yes, Sophia, we're a real family now, and nothing will ever change that." As weeks turned into months, life slowly began to settle into a comforting rhythm for Ryan, Emma, and Sophia. They moved into a new house further away from the city, a modest but cozy home surrounded by a small garden. It was a fresh start, away from the shadows of the past. One evening, as the golden light of the setting sun streamed through the windows, Emma and Ryan sat together on the porch while Sophia played nearby with her doll. Emma's belly had started to show, and her hand rested protectively over it, a quiet symbol of hope for the future. "Do you think we've finally outrun the past?" Emma asked, her voice thoughtful. Ryan looked at her, his eyes full of quiet determination. "We haven't just outrun it. We've faced it, fought it, and left it behind. This," he gestured to Sophia and the growing life within Emma. "This is what matters now." Emma smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "You've given us a life I didn't think was possible. I hope you know how much you mean to me, to all of us." Ryan leaned closer, his hand gently covering hers. "Emma, you've shown me what it means to truly fight for something worth living for. I can't imagine my life without you and Sophia." Sophia, overhearing their conversation, ran up to them, her gray eyes wide with curiosity. "What are you talking about?" she asked, climbing onto Ryan's lap. "We're talking about how lucky we are to have you," Ryan said, wrapping an arm around her. "Are you going to tell the new baby how lucky they are too?" she asked innocently, placing a hand on Emma's belly. Emma laughed softly. "I think they'll figure it out when they meet you." Sophia beamed and hugged both of them tightly. For the first time in years, their home felt like a sanctuary, filled with laughter, warmth, and the kind of love that can weather any storm. 6 months later, the family welcomed a baby boy into the world. They named him Ethan, a name that symbolized strength and renewal. Ryan held him gently in his arms, marveling at the tiny life they had created together. Sophia stood nearby, her face glowing with excitement. "Can I hold him?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. "Of course," Emma said, guiding Sophia to sit on the couch. Ryan carefully placed Ethan in her arms. "He's so small," Sophia whispered, her smile lighting up the room. "Yes, but he's already part of our big, brave family," Ryan said, his voice filled with pride. As the days turned into years, the family grew stronger, their bond unbreakable. Emma pursued her passion for teaching, and Ryan continued his work, but their true focus was on creating a life of love and stability for their children. Agnes, Ryan's mother, reached out occasionally, her letters expressing regret for the pain she had caused. Though Ryan still felt the sting of her words from the past, he chose to forgive her. Life had taught him that holding on to anger only dimmed the light of the present. On a quiet summer evening, as the family gathered around a bonfire in their backyard, Sophia turned to Ryan and said, "Do you think we'll always be this happy?" Ryan looked at her, then at Emma holding Ethan, and smiled. "Happiness is something we choose every day. As long as we have each other, I believe we will be." The fire crackled softly, the warmth reaching out into the cool night air. For the first time in what felt like forever, they knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as a family. And that was enough.